I believe that next generations, certainly, gold is again going to be used as day-to-day money, not the dollar. The dollar's on its way out. It's a dead duck. The Chinese and the Russians in particular have been huge buyers of gold over the last decade. Why? Because they don't want to use dollars to settle trades between foreign countries. The whole world settles trades in dollars. They don't want to use dollars. It's the currency of their adversary, who is unpredictable, hostile, might cut them off from the banking system. They're going to go back to using gold. They're not going to even use yuan or rubles because they don't trust each other, and they shouldn't. So the world's going to go back to gold. If I'm right about the Greater Depression having started back in 2007, and it's going to get much, much worse in its second stage, which is near upon us, demand for industrial metals is not going to be great. Listen, you want gold, and if you want to speculate a little bit, buy silver, because it's a much smaller market and much more volatile than gold. All these secondary metals are interesting and have their own characteristics. Like right now, you can build a case for copper and nickel in particular. You can build an excellent case for uranium, which is also very cheap, because they're all very cheap right now. But because we're going into a nasty depression, I wouldn't be over-enthusiastic about them at the moment.
As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Reluctant Preppers provides educational awareness and commentary only. Opinions expressed do not constitute personalized financial advice. Viewers are encouraged to do their own research and seek qualified personal financial consultation before making investment decisions. Welcome back, Reluctant Preppers. We are privileged to have this first-time guest today. He was recommended by one of our listeners, and we got him on. He's with us today. That's Doug Casey of InternationalMan.com and also of CaseyResearch.com. Doug Casey is author of 2 New York Times bestsellers, Crisis Investing and Strategic Investing. He's also written 2 novels of a series of 7, Speculator and Drug Lord. He gives wide-ranging advice to break our thinking out of the box from preconceived notions of limits we might be under as we approach options that are going to be successful for ourselves and our family in the future. Doug, thank you for joining us this first time on Reluctant Preppers.
Well, it's a pleasure.
You were highly recommended by more than one of our viewers, and so I started following your writings on internationalman.com, interviews there, and so on. I subscribed. I've been receiving those and reading them since, and it's taken quite a bit of time to get on your calendar because you've got a lot of commitments and a lot of travels, and we're just glad you could make it here to spend some time with us. And we've got a lot of questions that were submitted in advance of this interview by our audience that we're going to be getting in front of you today. And I want to just, if you could kick us off with telling us maybe just a bit more about your novel series that started out with Speculator and Drug Lord and what direction you're taking that, what it's all about.
Well, the reason I decided to do novels is because there are a lot of things that you can say in fiction that really best not say, even dare not say, in the form of nonfiction. So in this series of novels, which I'm doing with my co-author, John Hunt, our hero, Charles Knight, advances from one politically incorrect occupation to another and reforms their unjustly besmirched reputations. He starts out at age 23 as a speculator, gets lucky in the mining stock market, makes $1 million, goes to Africa to check out the mine, finds it's a fraud, and from there takes his $1 million and turns it into 200 million, gets involved in an African bush war with boy soldiers and all kinds of things. It's actually a very good read and very educational about the mining business, which I've been involved in for many years. And everybody's first novel, they say, and it's true, is always semi-autobiographical at least. In any event, 7 years later, we find Charles, after running around the world for that period of time, educating himself, he becomes a drug lord. And drug lords are supposed to be bad guys, but Charles is a very good guy, although he gets in trouble with both the DEA and the FDA, makes another couple $100 million, once again has it stolen from him. But this is quite an education in the drug business of all types. And at that point, he's rather pissed off, and he decides there are just some people that need killing. And that is what Assassin is all about, where we examine not just the techniques and revisionist history of famous assassinations in world history, starting with Caesar and Lincoln and going on, Kennedy, and many others, but more important, the morality and efficacy of political assassinations, at which point we'll be doing, by this time next year, terrorist, which he's accused of being. And I have many opinions on terrorism, which is really just a method of warfare, much like cavalry charges or artillery barrages. And it becomes more radical from there. But that'll take us up to the first 4 of the 7.
It does sound quite gripping and thought-provoking, and that's one of the things I noticed about your writing. It tends to push the edges of preconceived notions of conventional thinking and get people out of their comfort zone. Sometimes that's a very productive thing in getting us to consider options and opportunities that are not conventional, that are not what we're being presented with as the limited options available to us in sort of a herd mentality. And that's sometimes swimming against the stream it seems to be the hallmark of your approach. So these, whether it's in fiction or whether it's some of the other writing that you've done, it seems to be a kind of a characteristic you have of trying to break us out of our comfort zone.
Yes, well, that's right, because I'm afraid most people, and Americans in particular, act more like potted plants than actually free humans. They're generally born in one place and live there and die in that one place. And I don't see that as being a very good survival strategy for anything other than a plant. So I've personally been to over 155 countries, many times. I've lived in 10. Currently, I spend most of the year in Argentina and Uruguay. And I like it. It scares most Americans. They're afraid that it must be dangerous. They're like medieval peasants. They're afraid that if they go over the next hill and stay after dark, there might be dragons. I assure you there aren't. I feel more at ease and safer these days outside of the U.S. than I do inside the U.S. because I think this country is moving towards something that will resemble a civil war. Not what we had during in the unpleasantness of 1861 to 65. That wasn't a civil war, incidentally. That was a war of secession, which is different than a civil war. But I think that people that live in these red counties and blue counties, generally, birds of a feather hang together geographically, generally, there are irreconcilable differences. And that usually ends in with real unpleasantness.
It's certainly scaling up, and the consequences of those differences, and I think the different worldviews that they represent, the stakes seem to be getting higher as the years go by, to where more is being demanded or more is being proscripted of people who at some point will, if they're libertarian minded or if they care about constitutionality or anything like that, are be confronted with a stark choice between continued compliance or not, and I see that the dynamic pressing us apart from in that direction for sure.
Yes, yeah, I completely agree with you. I'm speaking to you right now I lived during the northern summer in the People's Republic of Aspen, Colorado. Very pleasant place to live, actually. And I have a lot of friends here. But the vast majority of Aspen's residents, and it's only a town of 6,000 people, maybe 8,000, they're all hardcore lefties, almost all. So even some of the people I have lunch with every day. And of course, I speak my mind, and they can like it or lump it. But the problem is the U.S. has turned left greatly in the last 50 years. And I attribute that to the fact that almost everybody today, well, first of all, everybody goes to high school, and teachers, generally speaking, are lefties, much more now than they used to be when I went to school, much more. And especially if they're in college. And everybody goes to college these days. Not everybody did 50 years ago. And almost all of the faculties of colleges, and I've been a trustee of 2 colleges, so I'm speaking firsthand here, they're all cultural Marxists, horrible people. And they indoctrinate kids that go in looking at these authority figures and absorbing the nonsense that they're told. So it's going to get even more lefty in the future. It's not good. I mean, when you look at these nincompoops that were lined up to run for the Democratic Party, and I'm not saying that the nincompoops that lined up in 2016 were much better. They were somewhat better, but not much better. But these 20 people that want to be president for the Democratic part of the ticket, I mean, some of them are actually criminally insane as far as I'm concerned. So it doesn't augur well.
When you talked about basically the takeover of public education and the universities by extreme left, socialists and other philosophies, you wouldn't stop there either. It's not just education, but entertainment and media and the technical giant companies that are shaping a lot of our culture. So, heaven help our next generation and beyond, because it's not going to come from any mainstream sources to be able to even think rationally. That's the other risk. You could think that rationality and critical thinking and that sort of thing would be some kind of an insulation or a buffer or a protective factor against wacky teachers. But when the school system is undermining the learning of rational thought or critical thinking, and it's all about feelings and that sort of thing, you're not left with many defenses as a young person these days.
No, you're not. And in most of these colleges, if you speak your mind, if you're a libertarian or a conservative or a classical liberal, you'll be ostracized by your classmates. And so I've recommended for years. I did a full hour on the Phil Donahue show the day before the national elections in 1980. It's on YouTube, so you can look it up. And one of the things that the audience booed me about, there were other things, was almost like the mob at Caesar's funeral, where the mob goes cheering to booing. I mean, you talk to more than a dozen people in a group, and you're dealing with the lowest common denominator. I'm sad to say, but one of the things that I said that they didn't like was that I said that I don't recommend kids go to college. I considered it a misallocation of 4 years of time and a whole bunch of money. And it's a lot more money now than it was then.
Oh, yeah.
And the quality of the education is lower. It's okay if you want to go for science, technology, engineering, math, medicine, that type of thing. Or if you need a piece of paper, which you do to practice law. But other than that, you should educate yourself, not be indoctrinated and waste all that money and time at college today. I can drink beer and chase girls much more effectively outside of the university environment. But most people are so brainwashed that they think they need a degree, which is nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
But, it's fine for me to give my opinion, but the trend in motion, which is, must get into a school, more prestigious the better, that trend will stay in motion until the whole system blows up, which it will do.
Well, we're certainly seeing some cracks in that foundation with free online universities, or even some of these big name schools offering free courses online. So we'll see how that plays out. But you're right, it's one of those industries that's been government sponsored, so it's being completely distorted as any other industry where the government gets their hands in it.
You're absolutely right. The reason why education, I hate to call it that because it's really not, costs as much as it is largely because of state involvement in the educational system. The state should be 100% out of anything to do with education, and I mean anything. Well, the same is true of the medical industry.
Mm-hmm.
The huge rise in costs for medical procedures is 100% due to government intervention, directly and indirectly. Medicine is a high-tech business, and costs should be dropping rapidly the way they are in the computer business, mm-hmm. which incidentally is mostly unregulated, but it's doing just the opposite because of state involvement.
We had an interview with Dr. Elena George, who is a family practice doctor out of Atlanta, who is a champion for patients' rights and affordable health care, that sort of thing. And she talked to us about the complete brainwashing that we're subjected to, and we see with great relief our initial statement of benefits or whatever after we've seen a doctor or a laboratory or a hospital or whatever, and you see some just unthinkably high, ludicrously high number of what the charge would have been had not your good cop insurance company swept in to knock it down by 60 or 80% or something like that. You go, at least I have insurance to cause that to come down, so I don't have to pay this ungoshly high number now. But she said that the hospital administrators can then turn around and claim the difference between that ridiculous number that nobody would ever pay and what they actually got reimbursed, which is still crazy high by the insurance, as lost revenue, and they can get reimbursement through Medicare for that. So there's absolutely no incentive for them to lower their medical costs because of that subsidy effect from the government. Medicare, you got their back.
Oh no, it's completely bizarre and entirely corrupt and uneconomic, and people forget that medical insurance, you shouldn't call it health insurance, right, incidentally, because it doesn't insure your health. It only insures medical expenses. But the bad guys like to say health insurance because people say, "Oh, health, yeah, I want something that'll insure my health." It's a kind of psychological warfare by corrupting the use of language. But there wasn't any medical insurance before World War II, or not much. And it was added on as a benefit to evade wage and price controls by corporations here in the U.S., because everything was wage and price control during World War II. And then the government started throwing money at the medical business and jammed up. It's beyond redemption now. I don't know how you turn this thing around. You have to wait until the whole thing falls apart. But unfortunately, after things fall apart, they usually get worse, not better. So I'm not very optimistic.
One glimmer of hope that we had from that interview with Elena George and also with Dr. Jane Nielsen, MD, who's a family practice doctor in Ohio, is more and more doctors, those who are opting out of the hospital or clinic or HMO system in the insurance system entirely and are just having direct local practices where people form a put them like a retainer relationship, a boutique membership with your doctor, so it directly go from the individual directly with the doctor. You pay a flat rate per month, and you get services directly, and you don't have to go through all this silly protocol hoops and stupid stuff like that. So there's a few promising and some freestanding service providers like the Surgery Center of Oklahoma and this and that, where there's dramatically lower costs and just completely outside the insurance loop. So trying to get off that crack house of insurance money and get out of that corrupt system as much as they can, but you're still stuck sometimes when it comes to the medications and that sort of thing. But
yeah, I was going to say, oddly enough, just today, I went to one of the luncheon groups that I belong to here in Aspen. Generally a bunch of retired and semi-retired rich guys that bring in speakers. And one of the speakers today was a doctor of rheumatology, pointing out that, and he showed statistics across the country, that if you want an appointment with a specialist in rheumatology, depending on where you are, you're going to have to wait anywhere from 2 to 6 months before you can even get an appointment with a rheumatologist. And this is the way it is with most specialties today in the United States. Nobody wants to be a doctor today because there's no money in being a doctor anymore. There's no real relationship with your patients. All you're doing is filling out forms, and it's not the way it used to be. There's no money in it. There's no pride in it. I mean, most of the doctors in this country are probably going to be foreigners that are coming here from third world countries, because even though doctors generally don't earn a lot of money anymore in relative terms, I mean, not really, not what they should. Most of the doctors are going to be foreigners in the future, Pakistanis, what have you.
And artificially intelligent teledoc type systems where you enter in your symptoms and the computer tells you what you probably got and dials up your prescription for you.
That is the wave of the future, because I am a believer in technology. There's some things that are disturbing, but on the other hand, you have to note that there are more scientists and engineers alive today that have lived in the entire history of the Earth put together. And they're doing the things to improve science and technology that they've always done. So areas like artificial intelligence and robotics and nanotechnology and genetic engineering, they are compounding rapidly. So there's always good news to countervail against the bad news.
Yeah, and in each of these fields, technology always brings it's a two-edged sword, because it brings it can be a reducer of cost, increaser of availability and efficiency and that sort of thing, but there can always be the other considerations that have to be balanced with that, as far as autonomy of the individual, sovereignty of the individual, privacy, and so on, and even the understanding of individual identity and your rights to yourself, your body, your thoughts, etc. So, we got a lot of topics we could get into. I would like to turn, if we could, our attention to some viewers' questions that were submitted for you, if you're game for that.
Oh, sure I am, of course.
Okay.
And don't worry, the government's probably going to, the government makes sure it always gets technology first, and I'm sure it'll set up Skynet or something like that. So on the way to utopia, we'll probably go through the world of the Terminator as well.
Right. Well, that's we have had Catherine Austin Fitz on, whose real game of missing money report includes about how the unconstitutional confiscation of the middle class's wealth is used by the government for all kinds of secret programs that are now off books, because we have FASB 56, which says they don't have to report their accounting properly anymore. So and we're going to actually see her live and in person later this month at a special event up in Toronto. So we're looking forward to that.
Well, that ought to be fun.
Yeah. So we've got a question here from a subscriber by the name of Yisip Yacht, who asks, Doug, what were your criteria in choosing to live in Argentina?
Well, having been to almost every country in the world that's worth going to, and wanting to have an alternative to living in the U.S., it was a process of elimination. Ruled out Canada, Central America is where the Frito Bandito lives. I've spent a lot of time in Africa. If I was 30 and I wanted to make my fortune, I would unquestionably go to Africa, but I'm not, and I don't, so I rule Africa out. And I love Asia, Southeast Asia in particular, but I could live in Thailand very comfortably, but I'd never be a Thai or accepted as such. So it came to Latin America, and I've been to every country in Latin America numerous times. Argentina is the most European country in Latin America, the most outward looking. It has basically the most libertarian traditions. It's a big country, seventh largest country in the world, but with only 40 million people. And they all live around BA. Lots of advantages to it. And I used to play polo, and that was a draw too. But unfortunately, Argentina, which used to be one of the wealthiest countries in the world, one of the top 4 or 5, they started treading the path towards socialism and fascism 100 years ago. And just now, the bad guys won the primary elections there. So it's a great place to live. It is not a great place for your money to live. But having said that, and I could talk about Argentina for a long time, for an hour, if you wanted to, where are you going to go? There's no country in the world that is becoming more free. Absolutely not. They all have legislatures, and what legislatures do is they pass laws every day. And those laws restrict what you can do and tell you what you have to do and what you can't do and how they'll punish you. Okay, all that's true. But everybody ought to have a crib outside the U.S. or whatever their home country is. And Argentina is a groovy place to live, notwithstanding the problems that it encounters. Right now, it's one of the cheapest countries in the world. If you want to give you an idea, if I go out to a decent restaurant here in town for 2 people, it'll cost $100. In Argentina, the same restaurant, what would cost $100 would cost about $20. It's really, really cheap, and real estate is really, really cheap. And so that's the answer to the question. That basically is what drew me to Argentina. Not just that it's cheap, because sometimes it's very expensive, but I like the culture. I like the wide open spaces. It's a great place.
Do you speak Spanish fluently?
I'm not a good linguist. My French, which I learned when I was in college, went to school in Switzerland and France, is still probably better than my Spanish. But I don't need to speak anything. I don't need to speak very good Spanish, because anybody that you're going to speak to that's worth speaking to, frankly, speaks excellent English. English is the world's language. So Americans can afford to be lazy, but I can get by okay, as well as French and in German, which is entirely unimportant to speak German because every German speaks English. So, yeah, it's important just to keep your brain active to learn a foreign language.
This may sound like a pedestrian question, but I'm going to ask it anyway just because it'll help me and it may help some other viewers. You said, implicit in that question is criteria in choosing to live in Argentina. We never even addressed the underlying assumption there that there's a reason why a person would want to have a second country to go live in. I know you've probably covered that 100 times for your own subscribers and so on, but could you at least hit the high points for us? Why do you think that that's actually something people should be considering?
Sure. If you were living in Russia in 1917, you might not have guessed that 5 years later, it would be a different country after Lenin took over. And if you were living in Germany in 1930, you'd never have guessed what was going to happen 5 years later. Same is true of Vietnam if you lived there, and Korea if you lived there, and every damned country in Africa. You've got to have a place to escape to. Wars come and go. And the direction the U.S. is heading at this point, I'm not a great fan of Trump. He's an economic idiot. And yes, I know this might offend a lot of your listeners who think he's a genius. But he actually knows nothing about economics. And his foreign policy is mildly psychotic. The thing I like about Trump is that he likes culture. And most people like him, and why I like him too, insofar as I do. You'd like to see us return to the way things were in the 50s, but it ain't going to happen for many reasons. I don't think he's going to be reelected in 2020. And what does that mean? It means that we're going to get one of these lunatic fringe Democrats in office, and it's going to happen because of, and at the same time, as we enter the Greater Depression. As unpleasant as things were back in 2008, you might recall, they're going to be much worse and much different and much longer lasting than they were back then. So the answer to your question is, if you're in a position to do so, you're foolish if you don't have a crib outside your home country.
Fair enough. Hey, we've got another question here from Magic Hand Puppet who says, Doug's one of my favorites. I'd love to hear him speak of his expectations of the near future in America. You've been doing some of that. And what the timing of the collapse might be and how people might prepare.
Well, I'm surprised that the country recovered as well as it did from the near collapse in 2007 through 10. But it's actually been a rather weak recovery. And I'm surprised it's lasted as long as it has. But there are actually a lot of even conventional economic indicators now that tell us that we're going over the edge. And I think that by the time the election comes next year, that we're going to be in the midst of a real storm. And the average American, knowing nothing about economics, will vote for somebody else who promises them more free stuff. And that's going to be a Democrat. And then hold on to your hat. Taxes are going to go up. Inflation's going through the roof. Lots of unemployment, bankrupt companies, stock market collapse, probably, absolutely a bond market collapse, which means a lot of pension funds aren't going to be there. This is really going to be interesting. And I would much rather watch it on my widescreen out in the Pampas than I would out my front window. Although here in Aspen, we're pretty insulated from mobs with pitchforks and torches. But, who knows?
This next question kind of presses into that recent article you wrote about trends and economic factors for someone who wants to make a world for them, a name for themselves in Africa. Ra Rasputin says, in a recent article, Doug accused that China was planning to send 300 million poor Chinese to colonize Africa, but then he also advises ordinary Westerners to migrate to Africa so that they can be at the top of the heap and get to rub shoulders with Africa's elite. Is this hypocrisy?
No, it's not hypocrisy. If you are an American, you are about an order of magnitude, let's say 10 times, or maybe 2 orders of magnitude ahead of the average African. There are not many foreign white people in Africa, really, anywhere. So that if you go to Africa, look, I can go to any country in Africa, and within a couple of weeks, I can probably be sitting in the office with the president, because I've done it any number of times. Anybody can do it. An American, look, if you're an American in his 20s, there's tens of millions of people just like you. You don't have any marginal advantage. You're on a level playing field. I don't like level playing fields. I like playing fields that are tilted steeply in my direction. You go to Africa, they will be. It'll be easy to meet people because you got connections, you got money, you got experience, you've got all kinds of things that the locals don't have. That's what you take advantage of. Now, the Chinese are not stupid at all. In fact, they're very smart. And it's very smart of them to export a few 100 million surplus people to Africa. And they'll take over Africa. The poor Africans are going to wish that the white colonialists are back. But it's not being, I don't even understand the question about being hypocritical. I'm giving people advice as to what, if they have at all a sense of adventure, they should do to improve their economic status in the world. The Chinese are doing that, and you can do it too.
You mentioned in that same article, I believe, that China has had a cultural pattern. I've heard this certainly mentioned by other observers of cultural trends. I know Thomas Sowell from the Hoover Institution talking about how certain cultural groups, no matter where they migrate to in the world, they end up rising to the top of the socioeconomic heap because they should have cultural traits of industrious hard work and that sort of thing. And anyway, Chinese being one of those.
Oh, that's absolutely true. Anywhere you go in the world, anywhere, Chinatowns develop where all the Chinese hang together and they work with each other. They're like Mormons who, one Mormon works with another Mormon in preference to working with the Goyim. It's like that with the Jews. And like the Jews, the Chinese have an average IQ that's probably about 105, above that of the average European. So sure, it's absolutely correct.
We've got a question from Mr. Leon 1701 who says, how much, and it's a simple question, but the answer is interesting, and I'll clarify that neither we nor our guests give direct financial advice here, but it says, how much silver bullion do I need to protect my future?
Well, first of all, silver bullion is not the answer. You need a lot because it's only worth $16 or $17 an ounce as we speak. I think it's an excellent speculative vehicle at this point. But the problem with silver is that we could talk for an hour about the advantages of silver and gold and platinum and other metals. Look, gold comes first. Gold is actually money. Silver is a secondary money, but mainly an industrial metal. So to answer your question, I think at this point, you should be buying silver and gold. And if you want to speculate, maybe lose your money, but maybe make 100 to 1, you should be looking at mining stocks. So that's my answer. I'm friendly towards silver. But the problem with silver is there are a lot of people that make it into a religion. It's not a religion. It's just one of 92 naturally occurring elements. But I'm friendly towards silver, very friendly at this point.
So, okay, let's just chase that line of questioning a little bit farther and say if someone was concerned about the risks that are inherent in the fiat currency system and the banking system and so on, and they wanted to use precious metals, for example, gold in your case, as you mentioned, as a hedge, what kind of criteria or thought processes do you think a person would be prudent to think through in terms of what portion of their, survival cash they want to put into something like that kind of a vehicle versus other things you might recommend, whereas you mentioned land or whatever. You didn't say land, but you said arrangements that make it possible for you to get to a different jurisdiction, that sort of thing. But as far as we're talking about precious metals, what kind of criteria do you bring when you think about it?
Well, look, you've got to ask what is money. It's a medium of exchange and a store of value. And right now, neither gold or silver, which are the two historical monies, there have been others, everything from cows to salt and so forth. Neither of them are used as practical monies. I believe that next generations, certainly, gold is again going to be used as day-to-day money, not the dollar. The dollar's on its way out. It's a dead duck. The Chinese and the Russians in particular have been huge buyers of gold over the last decade. Why? Because they don't want to use dollars to settle trades between foreign countries. The whole world settles trades in dollars. They don't want to use dollars. It's the currency of their adversary, who is unpredictable, hostile, might cut them off from the banking system. They're going to go back to using gold. They're not going to even use yuan or rubles because they don't trust each other, and they shouldn't. So the world's going to go back to gold. The world's not going to go back to silver. So silver is always going to be a secondary money, mainly an industrial metal. So I don't know. Look, a good money's got to be durable. That's why you don't use salt as money. It's got to be divisible. That's why you don't use artwork as money. It's got to be convenient. That's why you don't use lead as money. It takes too much to be worth anything. That's a minor problem with silver, too, incidentally.
Mm-hmm.
It's got to be consistent. That's why you don't use diamonds as money. That's why you don't use land as money. And it's got to have use value in and of itself. That's why you shouldn't use paper as money. So the whole monetary system is going to come apart at the seams over the next decade. It's going to be very ugly because most people just save in their native currency, whether it's dollars or yuan or kwaches or pulas or ringgits or whatever, these worthless currencies that these various countries turn out that are worth little within the country and nothing outside of the country. All these people in the world, billions of people, save with these fiat paper currencies. They can become worthless overnight. And what's that mean? It means all your savings are wiped out. So yeah, you should own a lot of gold coins, not silver bullion. Don't want silver bullion. If you do anything, buy silver coins. But no, gold coins are the way to fly.
There's another question here asking about, from JM Carp 98 says, where does Doug think that industrial metals are going?
Basically nowhere. There are special situations. From time to time, there's a boom in one specialty metal or not. Tantalum, vanadium, the rare earth metals, every once in a while, because 90% of them are mined in China, and then they run up and it looks like the Chinese are going to stop exporting them. There's all kinds of things like this. Copper is the major industrial metal, but and copper is going to have a lot of demand in the future because the whole world is going to go to electric cars. There's no question about that, battery-operated cars. And nickel is going to profit from that too. But that said, if I'm right about the Greater Depression having started back in 2007, and it's going to get much, much worse in its second stage, which is near upon us, demand for industrial metals is not going to be great. Listen, you want gold, and if you want to speculate a little bit, buy silver, because it's a much smaller market and much more volatile than gold. All these secondary metals are interesting and have their own characteristics. Right now, you can build a case for copper and nickel in particular. You can build an excellent case for uranium, which is also very cheap, because they're all very cheap right now. But because we're going into a nasty depression, I wouldn't be over enthusiastic about them at the moment.
I was remiss earlier when you were talking about contrasting the fundamental characteristics of money to ask where you stand on cryptocurrencies.
Cryptocurrencies have been very, very good to me. I was a late adopter. I mean, I was introduced to them very early. I was even given a physical Bitcoin by a young Belgian guy in Argentina back in 2013. I bought him lunch, and he said, "Here, have this. Give me they exist, physical Bitcoins." But I still have it in my safe deposit box. But used as money because I couldn't see what its value was. It took me a while. Then I went to a conference on that here in Aspen, actually, in 2017. And I figured, oh, God, it's a transfer mechanism. It's a way you can move money across borders. It's a way you can move money anywhere without using the system, and do it secretly, privately. And immediately, I cottoned onto it. I put $100,000 in Bitcoin, basically, a couple of these, Ethereum and so forth, but mostly Bitcoin. And so I was very late arriving to the party, but I dumped most of it, like the 1st of January in 2018. And, and I'm playing with it now. The answer to the question is, there are second and third generation cryptocurrencies now that my friend Marco Wutzer, who writes one of our newsletters, looks at. And Marco's of the opinion that some of these special use things are not equivalent to Bitcoin because they're not competitive monies. They're not transfer mechanisms. They're used for other purposes. He thinks that some of them have 100 to 1, 1,000 to 1 potential. So I'm buying some of them. I'm a believer in the whole blockchain technology and this type of thing. So, yeah, Bitcoin's great. The only problem with it is that there might be a Bitcoin 2.0, which means nobody's going to want Bitcoin 1.0 anymore. So there are risks. It's not going to happen anytime soon with gold, I promise you.
We've just got time, I think, for one more question. We've got a lot more that we're not going to get to this time, so I'm going to have to see if we can get back on your calendar again. Zorro de la Vega says, what advice would you give to the 21-year-old you?
Well, I'd already have been on the point of graduating from college, so it would be better if I'd had good counsel when I was the 18-year-old me. And then I wouldn't have gone.
Could have saved 3 whole years.
Have gone to college.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And the money that it would have cost in that time. And what would I do with that time? Look, if you're well disciplined, and the problem is discipline. You don't want to. You need to go out and socialize and chase the opposite sex and do all this stuff, and hey, that's fun. But when you're young, that's the best time to get an education. And I would say, with the computer, all the knowledge in the world is available in just about any form that you care for on the computer or your iPhone, for that matter. So I would travel. Traveling is the best education, and I would educate myself in every area of life. Take one science after another. Biology, learn a lot about biology, learn a lot about geology, learn about astronomy, learn about, literature, learn about history, learn about ancient history. These are things you can teach yourself. You don't need to sit bored in a classroom listening to some moron drone on giving the same speech he's done for years before. You should travel around the world is what you should do with the money that you're saving going to college. And while you're doing it, meet lots of people and look for businesses, places where you can buy 1 million widgets for $1 and sell them someplace else for $2. That's what you should do. But I didn't have good counsel, and I had to figure it out myself. So I wasted a lot of time. I had fun, but it would have been much better. So that's the answer.
That's fair enough. Well, we've been speaking with Doug Casey of internationalman.com and caseyresearch.com this first time on Reluctant Preppers. Doug, we just scratched the surface of a dozen very fruitful topics that we could circle back and should circle back on, and we'd love to get back on your calendar. So just want to thank you for joining us this first time on Reluctant Preppers.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. And once again, let me tout, while I have a chance, the two novels, Speculator and Drug Lord. I think that your listeners are going to be mightily entertained and learn a lot from them.
Very good. Thank you, Doug.
Okay, same to you.
What if gold or silver drop in price after I order it?
Well, everything fluctuates with time, but nothing has held up longer and better than gold and silver throughout all the changes that have happened in history. Your first ounce of silver is at spot price, and you get free shipping on any order over $99 at sdbullion.com/RP. Hey, Reluctant Preppers. If you haven't heard, we've already started our monthly 1-ounce U.S. Silver Eagle thank you gift to one active Patreon subscriber each month, signed by your host, Dunnigan Kaiser. And you don't want to miss out on that.
Please help us grow by subscribing today at patreon.com/reluctantpreppers.